I was unpacking plates in a sunlit kitchen that did not know my family when my phone lit up with Lena's name. Her voice came through bright and breathless, a kind of excitement that always carried a warning for me. I am outside your place. Mom and Dad got everything handled. I have the keys. We can start moving my boxes now. I could hear a car door slam and the shuffle of someone else's footsteps. For a beat, I watched a dust mote spin in the light and felt the old reflex to fix whatever storm she brought. Then I remembered the lease paperwork on my counter and the closing documents tucked in my desk. That house is not mine anymore, I said, keeping my voice even. I sold it 2 weeks ago. Silence stretched as if the line had gone underwater. Lena laughed once, a short, confused sound. Do not joke. Mom had copies made yesterday. I walked to my new apartment window and looked at a city that did not belong to my childhood. Not a joke, I said. Ring the doorbell. If someone answers, please apologize for the intrusion. My heart pounded, not from fear but from the strange freedom of telling the truth out loud. On her end, I heard the metal clink of keys, the mechanical whir of a lock that would not catch, and then the muffled murmur of voices. A different voice, low and wary, drifted through. Can I help you? The stranger. The owner. Lena came back to the phone with a gasp. There is different furniture. Where are you? I set a stack of plates in the cabinet and let the quiet sit. I am downtown, I said. I moved. If you need a place for tonight, there are short-term rentals nearby. She made a soft sound, shock curdling into anger. You did this to keep me out. You always find a way to make me the problem. I stayed still, anchoring to the countertop beneath my palms. I did this to keep myself safe. The line went dead. My new building hummed like a held breath. Downstairs, the doorman would be learning my name. Next door, someone practiced scales on a piano. The old house felt far away and still I could see it. A tidy porch, a narrow garden where I had coaxed tomatoes from stingy soil, a front door I painted a calm green the year I learned to sleep through the night. Selling it had felt like walking away from a version of myself I had fought to build. Now, with Lena at a stranger's doorstep, I understood that I had not walked away. I had stepped aside from a trap. The phone buzzed again. Mom's name filled the screen. I answered and braced. Maya, what have you done? Her voice was already breaking. Your sister is in tears. She is standing outside what should be your home and telling me there are strangers in your living room. I pictured Mom in her kitchen, with the lemon curtains she replaced every spring, one hand on the counter, the other around a phone that had delivered our family's rules for as long as I could remember. I sold the house, I said. I did not discuss it because I did not want it stopped. A long exhale on her end, the rustle of a second handset lifting. Your father is on the line, she said. Victor's voice arrived like a closing door. You cannot make choices of this size without the family. It sounded like a verdict instead of a conversation. We had a plan to help your sister get stable. You removed the plan. I felt the old heat rise, the urge to justify and explain. I let it pass. I told you months ago that I would not live with Lena, I said. You ignored me and made keys. He started to protest. I kept speaking. My boundaries are not suggestions, they are not votes, they are mine. A quiet grew that felt unfamiliar. I heard my own breath and the faint piano again, moving up the scale. Mom tried a softer path. We could have worked it out. Families do not keep secrets. Families do not use each other's addresses for loans either, I said, and the line crackled with the memory we were all trying not to name. I am not punishing anyone. I am protecting my life. There was another pause, a different kind, an inventory of options closing. Victor cleared his throat. Where are you? We should talk in person. The request was not a request. In the old house, they would have walked in without ringing. In the new place, they would need permission. I will text you my address, I said. You will check in at the desk. If you raise your voice, the meeting ends. If you accuse or threaten, it ends. If you are willing to speak to me as an adult with my own life, you are welcome to come up." I hung up and let the phone rest on the counter. The room did not tilt, my knees did not shake. The sun warmed the tile, and the plates gleamed in their neat row, ordinary and perfect. Somewhere inside my chest, a knot I had worn like jewelry loosened a little. I poured water, drank, and listened to the scale on the piano resolve into a steady chord. The day felt new, not because of where I lived, but because of the person I had decided to be inside it. My story didn't start with the house, or even with Lena's call. It began in a childhood home where fairness was a word I learned only from books, never from practice. I was the eldest, the one expected to carry weight before my shoulders were ready. Dad liked to say, "Discipline builds character," but what it really built in me was silence, the kind you swallow to keep peace at the dinner table. Dad, Robert, was a small-town attorney who carried himself as though he ran the courts. At home, he issued rulings with the same tone he used on clients. Mom, Julia, once dreamed of being a singer but traded auditions for PTA committees. She poured her unfulfilled ambitions into Lena, my younger sister by 5 years, calling her our star. I was simply the example. From the moment Lena arrived, the scales tipped. Her crooked drawings were masterpieces taped to the fridge, while my science fair ribbons gathered dust in a shoebox. When she refused to clean her room, Mom laughed and said, "She's creative, she needs space." When I forgot to take the trash out, Dad declared, "Responsibility comes first, Maya." That word responsibility shadowed me like a second skin. By 12, I was chopping onions and stirring sauce while Lena sprawled on the couch playing video games. By 16, I was balancing Dad's checkbook, arranging Mom's doctor visits, and ironing school uniforms. Not just mine, but hers too. "You're better at this," they'd say, as if competence were a curse I'd cast on myself. Meanwhile, Lena's slip-ups were smoothed over with excuses. Her late homework was blamed on teacher bias. When she dented Dad's car at 17, they bought her a new one, while I was told college applications were my responsibility to figure out alone. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with financial aid forms spread out like puzzle pieces, Mom in the background rehearsing lines with Lena for a school play. No one offered to help me assemble a future. I learned early that affection in my family was conditional. When Lena scored a C on her report card, Dad clapped her on the back. "At least you tried." When I brought home an A-, he frowned. Slipping, Maya. Mom's praise came only when I was useful, babysitting cousins, organizing holiday meals, tutoring neighbors' kids. I became indispensable but invisible. The cruelest part wasn't just favoritism, it was the gaslighting that followed whenever I pointed it out. "You're imagining things," Mom would scold. "We love you both the same." Yet every Christmas, the pile under the tree leaned toward Lena. Every birthday, my cake came second to whatever crisis Lena staged to steal the spotlight. The lessons etched themselves into me. If I wanted something, I had to earn it twice over. If Lena wanted something, all she had to do was cry. That imbalance shaped the woman I became, determined, resilient, but constantly bracing for the rug to be pulled out. I don't tell you this for pity. I tell you because without understanding that imbalance, you can't understand why my house meant so much later, or why selling it was both liberation and loss. That house wasn't just wood and paint. It was proof that I could build a life without permission, that I could own something no one else could rearrange or claim. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if my parents ever realized what they were teaching. By handing Lena the world, they left her unprepared to face it. By piling the world on me, they left me wary but strong. Still, strength earned that way comes with scars. Scars that throb each time Lena shows up, expecting me to hand her pieces of my life. So when she stood at the door of a house that was no longer mine, shaking keys she didn't deserve, I wasn't just hearing her voice. I was hearing echoes of every dinner where I was scolded while she was coddled, every chore I completed while she escaped, every time I was told my achievements were expected while hers were celebrated. That moment wasn't new, it was the culmination of years. And that's why the house mattered, and why losing it on my own terms became the first real victory of my life. High school was the first place I began to notice that my family's version of love didn't match anyone else's. Friends' parents cheered from the bleachers, snapping photos no matter the score. Mine only came to Lena's events, waving handmade signs and chanting her name like she was the town's prodigy. When I ran track and crossed the finish line in first place, Dad barely looked up from his phone. Stay humble, Maya. Winning once doesn't make you special. The sting of those words stayed with me longer than the medal itself. College became my first quiet rebellion. Dad had mapped out a destiny for me: law school, then a position at his firm, eventually taking over his practice. He'd tell his colleagues at barbecues, "Maya's going to carry on the family name." I smiled politely, even while secretly filling out applications for scholarships in finance and business. When Boston State accepted me with a full ride, I hid the letter under my mattress for 3 days before working up the courage to announce it. The night I told them, we were sitting around the oak dining table that had been in the family since my grandparents. Dad's fork clattered against his plate. "Business? That's not a career, that's a hobby. You're throwing away a golden opportunity." Mom glanced at him nervously, then at me. "Sweetheart, your father only wants the best for you. Think carefully." Only Lena broke the silence, smirking as she twirled spaghetti on her fork. "Guess I'll be the lawyer then." The way Dad's eyes lit up at her words made something inside me splinter. At Boston State, I discovered what it meant to live without constant surveillance. I joined clubs no one approved, studied subjects I actually cared about, and learned how to make decisions without waiting for permission. The independence was intoxicating, but it also magnified the cracks already forming in my relationship with my family. Phone calls turned into interrogations about my grades, my choice of friends, even the part-time jobs I worked to support myself. When I didn't answer, Mom left voicemails dripping with guilt. "We raised you better than this, Maya. Don't shut us out." Holidays were the worst. Back home, the air was heavy with unspoken judgments. Relatives asked Lena about her acting classes, her photography workshops, her short-lived baking business, each new interest funded and celebrated like a triumph. Then they turned to me with questions sharpened into knives. "Still wasting time on numbers? When are you going to get serious about law school?" Their laughter filled the living room as if my dreams were a punchline. I learned to smile tightly, sip my water, and count the hours until my train back to campus. It was during one Thanksgiving break that the fracture lines deepened into a canyon. I mentioned an internship offer at a financial firm, my voice trembling with cautious pride. Dad's reaction was ice cold. "We didn't invest in your education so you could shuffle other people's money. You'll regret this path." Mom said nothing, her silence louder than his anger. Lena seized the opening to announce she was considering pre-law, and the applause she received around the table felt like a slap. I excused myself early that night, sitting alone on the porch in the cold, wondering if I'd ever truly belong in that house again. By the time I graduated, the distance between us was palpable. Calls went unanswered, texts ignored. Birthdays and Christmases came with gifts that felt more like barbs than blessings. Law school prep books wrapped neatly in ribbon, as though persistence could rewrite my choices. Yet every insult, every dismissal, fueled a quiet determination. If they couldn't see my worth, I'd make sure the world did. The cracks in our family portrait weren't just lines anymore. They were deep fractures, and I was no longer willing to plaster over them to keep the picture pretty. Graduation was supposed to be the moment when everything finally made sense. I walked across the stage with honors, shaking hands with professors who had seen me fight for every opportunity. My parents clapped politely from the back, their smiles thin, their eyes already fixed on Lena's next big phase. For me, that day wasn't about their approval. It was about survival. And survival meant carving out a life with no safety net. I landed an entry-level position at a small financial consulting firm. It wasn't glamorous long hours, low pay, and more spreadsheets than I could count, but it was mine. The office smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet, yet I cherished every moment. I arrived before dawn, stayed past closing, and volunteered for the messy projects no one else wanted. Each task was a chance to prove myself, not to them, but to me. Meanwhile, Lena drifted from one hobby to another, always with Mom's hand smoothing the path. Acting lessons one semester, a photography retreat the next. When those lost their shine, she dabbled in culinary school until the early mornings wore her out. Each time Dad praised her creativity and called me during my lunch breaks to remind me I should be aiming higher. "Law school is still waiting," he'd say. I'd chew my sandwich in silence, staring at the city skyline and reminding myself I wasn't going back. The firm eventually noticed my grit. Within 2 years, I earned a promotion to associate advisor. My name appeared on client accounts, my signature on proposals. It wasn't just money, it was identity. I began to see my own reflection not as the girl carrying Lena's burdens or obeying Dad's rules, but as a woman who could carry her own weight and then some. There were sacrifices, of course. While co-workers splurged on new cars and exotic vacations, I stayed in my modest studio apartment, driving a sedan older than most interns. Every bonus went straight into savings or small investments. My friends teased me for being frugal, but I had a different picture in mind. Keys in my own hand, a front door no one else had the right to walk through. At the same time, I built quiet rituals of self-reliance. Sunday evenings spent meal prepping instead of dining out. Early mornings at the park, running laps while listening to financial podcasts. Even my solitude became a kind of rebellion. I could sit in silence and feel at peace, something I never knew in a household where Lena's drama filled every corner. Still, guilt followed me like a shadow. Whenever Dad called with advice, I felt the old instinct to explain myself. Whenever Mom sighed about how much pressure Lena was under, I nearly offered money I couldn't spare. But then I remembered the years of carrying chores, expectations, and dismissals. I reminded myself that the only person responsible for my future was me. One night, after closing a major account, I walked home past glowing storefronts and caught my reflection in a window. For the first time, I didn't just see exhaustion in my eyes, I saw pride. It hit me then. I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. I was building something stronger than their validation. I was building a future they couldn't control. And even though I didn't know it yet, that future would soon take shape in the form of a house. A sanctuary I believed no one could touch. The idea of owning my own home first arrived as a whisper. It was a Saturday morning in my tiny studio apartment, sunlight falling through blinds that never quite closed properly. I was balancing my budget, sipping coffee from a chipped mug, when I realized something simple. I had saved enough. Years of saying no to vacations, to upgrades, to fleeting indulgences had piled up into something tangible. For the first time in my life, I could imagine putting down roots on my own terms. House hunting became my secret rebellion. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Lena. On weekends I'd meet with a realtor, touring houses in quiet neighborhoods, letting myself dream. Some were too polished, others too broken down. But then I found it. A modest 2-story with peeling shutters, hardwood floors that creaked with history, and a small yard out back where wildflowers sprouted between weeds. It wasn't perfect, and that was exactly why I loved it. When I signed the papers, I sat in my car outside the title office and cried, not from fear, but from relief. For once the deed carried only my name. No one else's fingerprints. No one else's expectations. Just mine. The keys felt heavy in my palm, like proof that all the years of sacrifice had finally crystallized into something real. That first night I ate takeout on the bare floor of the living room. No furniture, no curtains. Just me and a pizza box, and the echo of my laughter bouncing off the walls. I remember running my hand along the rough plaster, whispering, "You're mine." For the first time, I belonged somewhere. Of course, the news didn't stay secret for long. I made the mistake of sharing my joy with Mom on the phone. "I found a house," I said, excitement bubbling in my chest. There was a pause, followed by her careful voice. "Don't you think that's premature? You're not even married yet." Her tone suggested I had bought a mistake, not a milestone. When I tried to explain my reasoning, stable career, solid credit, financial sense, she sighed. "Your father thinks you should wait. Real estate is complicated. You could get taken advantage of." It wasn't advice, it was a warning. And behind the warning, I heard the same message I had grown up with. You can't be trusted to make your own decisions. Dad didn't attend the closing. He sent a text that read, "Hope you know what you're doing." Mom came, but her presence felt like a checklist of everything I'd overlooked. "This bathroom is small," she muttered. "Are you sure about these floors? Look at that crack in the wall." She didn't see a home, she saw a list of flaws. Lena tagged along, rolling her eyes. "This is so suburban, don't you want something more exciting? I couldn't live here." I smiled tightly and kept unpacking. Her words didn't touch me. The truth was, their skepticism only made my pride stronger. Over the next few months, I poured myself into the house. I painted the living room a calming sage green, built bookshelves for my growing collection, and planted herbs and roses in the yard. Every project was a declaration. This is my space, shaped by my hands, not handed down by anyone else. Even the imperfections became part of the story. The squeaky floorboard by the stairs reminded me I had chosen this place. The small reading nook under the window became my sanctuary, a spot where I could curl up on Sundays with coffee and finally exhale. When I invited friends over, they didn't see flaws, they saw warmth. They complimented the cozy kitchen, laughed with me in the backyard, and said things my family never did. "You've built something amazing." Their words stitched into me, healing little pieces I hadn't realized were torn. The house wasn't just a roof over my head, it was a rebuke to every moment of control, every dismissal, every sacrifice I had been forced to make as a child. It was my independence solidified in brick and wood. I believed nothing could touch that sense of safety. I believed I had finally outgrown their reach. The first time they showed up unannounced, I told myself it was harmless. It was a Sunday morning, I was still in my pajamas, and the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Mom and Dad stood on the porch with Lena trailing behind, all smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. "Surprise visit," Mom chirped, brushing past me before I could respond. We were just in the area. The area was 30 minutes from their house, in the opposite direction of anything they normally did. My gut told me this wasn't casual, it was inspection disguised as affection. Dad walked slowly through the house, running his hand along the banister like he was assessing workmanship. "You should have replaced these railings," he muttered. In the kitchen, he tapped on the counter. "Cheap granite, you'll regret this choice." His tone carried the same authority he used in court, like my house was just another case he needed to win. Mom rearranged throw pillows when she thought I wasn't looking. She shifted a framed photo of my college friends to the back of the shelf, replacing it with one of Lena's graduation portrait she had slipped into her purse and brought with her. "Looks better this way," she said with a soft smile, as if she hadn't just erased me from my own living room. And Lena, she sprawled across the sofa, scrolling her phone, sighing about how much space I had for just one person. Her words were casual, but I felt the barb. Space, in my family's language, meant waste. And waste was meant to be claimed. I tried to laugh it off, to keep things light. I made coffee, offered snacks. But after they left, the walls felt different. My sanctuary suddenly had fingerprints I hadn't invited. The visits multiplied. Every few weeks they'd appear, always without notice. Sometimes in the middle of a work call. Sometimes while I was hosting friends. Dad would critique whatever new project I'd finished. "That paint will chip in a year." Mom would fuss in the kitchen. "You really should organize your spices like I used to." Lena would wander upstairs uninvited, commenting on how that guest room would be perfect for me if I ever needed it. At first, I swallowed the discomfort. They were family after all. I told myself this was their awkward way of showing love. But love doesn't make you feel watched in your own home. Love doesn't rearrange your shelves or count your throw blankets like inventory. The final straw came one Wednesday evening. I returned from a late meeting to find Lena sitting at my dining table, laptop open, sipping wine from my favorite glass. She had let herself in using the spare key I kept hidden in a drawer. "Relax," she said when I froze in the doorway. "Mom said it was fine. I needed Wi-Fi to apply for jobs." It wasn't fine. My chest tightened as I realized nothing in this house was safe from them, not my privacy, not my peace, not even the lock on the door. That night, after Lena finally left, I walked through each room, touching the walls I had painted, the furniture I had chosen, the garden I had planted. All of it suddenly felt fragile, as if belonging to me only in theory. Their presence clung to the air, turning my sanctuary into something smaller, something tainted. It was then I understood. They didn't see my home as mine at all. They saw it as an extension of the family, an asset waiting to be reassigned, and me as nothing more than a placeholder until Lena needed it. And I knew, deep down, the invasions were only the beginning. For a while the intrusions were almost tolerable, annoying but predictable. What made everything unravel was Lena's slow, messy collapse. On the surface, she still posted filtered photos of brunches and weekend trips, smiling with friends who rotated in and out of her life like accessories. But beneath it, her world was slipping. She had never held a job longer than 6 months. At family dinners, she blamed toxic workplaces or jealous managers. Dad nodded sympathetically. Mom stroked her hair. And I bit my tongue while remembering the stack of unpaid bills she had forgotten on my counter. The truth was simpler. Lena was drowning in debt from luxury apartments, designer handbags, and vacations she couldn't afford. One night, after too many glasses of wine, she admitted the truth to me. "I maxed out 4 cards," she slurred, mascara streaked under her eyes. "But it's temporary. I've got opportunities lined up." "Opportunities?" I asked. She grinned weakly. "A podcast. A clothing line. Maybe YouTube." She said it as though ambition alone could erase interest rates. When I suggested she speak to a financial advisor or look into debt consolidation, her face twisted. "Don't lecture me. You think you're better because you hoard money." I didn't respond. But something inside me cracked. Because she wasn't wrong about one thing I had saved diligently, guarded my future like treasure, while she gambled hers away. And now my family was looking at me to cover the cost. The campaign began subtly. Mom would sigh during her surprise visits. "It's such a shame Lena's landlord raised the rent. She's struggling, poor thing." Dad chimed in. "You have so much space here, Maya. A guest room just sitting there. Isn't family supposed to help each other?" I repeated the same answer every time. "I love Lena, but we don't live well together. Temporary help, maybe. But not permanent." They didn't hear me. Or maybe they didn't want to. Then came the ambush dinner. I should have known when Mom insisted I come over on a Tuesday night. The table was set like it was Thanksgiving, candles flickering, silver polished. Halfway through the meal, Dad cleared his throat. "We've been talking. It makes sense for Lena to move in with you, just until she gets back on her feet." I set my fork down. "Absolutely not." Lena's eyes filled instantly, weaponizing tears. "I wouldn't be any trouble. Please, Maya. Just a few months." A few months in Lena's language meant forever. I looked at my parents. "You're asking me to give up the only peace I've ever had. The answer is no." Dad's expression hardened into the one he used in court, the one that told juries there was only one acceptable verdict. "Family takes care of family. I thought we raised you better than this." I held his gaze. "You raised me to be responsible. That's exactly what I'm being." The air at the table thickened. Mom dabbed at her eyes. Lena sniffled dramatically. No one touched their food. After that night, the calls multiplied. Mom left tearful voicemails. Dad left stern ones. Lena texted at all hours, pleading, guilt-tripping, accusing. My resolve held, But each message chipped away at my sanity. The house that once felt like a sanctuary now pulsed with dread. Every knock on the door made me flinch, wondering if they'd appear again with suitcases in hand. And yet, part of me still wavered. Because I remembered 12-year-old Lena clinging to my hand on the first day of school, her small body shaking with nerves. I remembered bandaging her scraped knee after she fell off her bike. Somewhere inside the manipulative adult was the sister I once protected. But that memory wasn't enough to erase the truth. Lena wasn't asking for help, she was demanding a bailout. Her collapse wasn't an accident. It was the inevitable result of years of being told she never had to carry weight because I would always do it for her. And this time, I refused to pick it up. The day I realized my home was no longer mine began with something small, a coffee mug. I opened the dishwasher and found one I didn't recognize. Chipped white porcelain with a floral rim. Not mine, not a guest's. But I'd seen it before. Lena carried that mug to every family gathering, claiming coffee tasted better in it. My stomach dropped. I checked the drawers. My spare key, the one I tucked in the back of a kitchen cabinet, was gone. Panic prickled my skin. I rushed to the hook by the door, counted carefully. My keys were there, untouched. Which meant someone had made a copy. That evening I confronted Lena by phone. "Have you been in my house?" She laughed. "Oh, don't be dramatic. I just needed a stable address for job applications. You weren't even home." My throat tightened. "That's not your decision to make." "Why are you being selfish?" She shot back. "We're family. This isn't just your house. Mom and Dad said it's fine." Her words hit like ice water. They had given her permission for something that was never theirs to give. The following week, I came home from a business trip to find subtle changes everywhere. My desk drawers slightly ajar, papers shuffled. A throw blanket folded differently than I'd left it. Even the faint scent of Lena's perfume clung to the air. Nothing stolen, yet everything violated. I wanted to scream, but instead I replaced the spare key and pretended calm. That night, at my parents' house, I overheard voices drifting from Dad's study. I stopped in the hallway, heart pounding. "She'll come around," Dad said firmly. "She always does what's right for the family in the end." Lena's laugh followed. "She barely uses that house. It makes more sense for me to live there." "We'll help you get settled," Mom added. "Maya just needs guidance." I stood frozen, listening to the people who raised me plot to hand over the one place I had built for myself. My sanctuary had become their bargaining chip. The next morning, I called a locksmith. By afternoon, every lock was changed, each key stamped with bold red letters, "Do not duplicate." I installed a new security system with cameras covering every entrance. It cost more than I had budgeted, but peace of mind was worth the price. The backlash came immediately. Lena's voicemail was indignant. "What the hell, Maya? My key didn't work. Did you seriously change the locks on me?" Mom's was drenched in guilt. "Sweetheart, Stephanie is very upset. I don't understand why you would do something so hostile. We're just trying to help both of you." And Dad's message cut the deepest. "This childish behavior needs to stop immediately. Call me back so we can discuss reversing this ridiculous decision." When I finally spoke to him, his tone was the same one I remembered from childhood: final, irrefutable. Family should always have access to each other's homes, in case of emergency. "She used her key when I wasn't there," I said, forcing my voice steady. "She's been using my address without permission. That crosses a line." "Don't be so selfish," he snapped. "Your sister is going through a difficult time. You have resources she doesn't." "My priority is protecting my home," I replied. "And my boundaries," he scoffed. "Independence? Is that what you call shutting out your family?" For a moment, I was 12 again, chastised for wanting fairness. But this time, I didn't bend. "I call it protecting what I worked for." The line went quiet. Then his voice hardened. "This isn't over, Maya. Families take care of each other, even when one member is being unreasonable." I hung up, shaking. It wasn't just about a key anymore. It was about ownership, control, and whether I had the right to live without their hands on my life. And for the first time, I began to fear what they might try next. I didn't have to wait long to find out what they would try next. A week after the lock change standoff, I stopped by my parents' house to return a casserole dish Mom had accidentally left in my car. The house smelled like lemon polish, the same scent that clung to every childhood memory of forced dinners and forced smiles. As I walked past the study, I heard voices through the cracked door. I should have kept walking, but something in their tone froze me. "She's always been too rigid," Dad said, his words clipped, authoritative. "Sometimes people need help managing their assets properly." "She barely lives there," Lena chimed in. "It's ridiculous that all that space is wasted on one person," Mom's softer voice followed. "We'll help her understand. Once Stephanie moves in, Maya will see it's for the best." My heart thudded. They weren't just hoping Lena would stay temporarily, they were planning a permanent transfer. My house, the one place I had built with my own hands and money, was being negotiated behind closed doors, as though it were a family heirloom I had borrowed. I backed away quietly, my palms slick with sweat. It was like being 12 again, overhearing grown-ups make decisions about my life with no input from me. Only this time the stakes weren't bedtime or chores. It was everything. That night, I sat in my living room staring at the sage-green walls I had painted myself. The thought of Lena claiming them as hers made bile rise in my throat. I imagined her spreading clothes across the guest bed, inviting friends over, taking over my kitchen. And worse, I imagined my parents standing in the doorway, approving, insisting it was the right thing. For days I tried to push the memory aside. Maybe I had misheard. Maybe they were just venting. But then the small intrusions escalated. Mail addressed to Lena began arriving at my house: credit card offers, job applications, even a package of luxury shoes she must have ordered using my address. When I confronted her, she dismissed it. "Relax, Maya. I need a stable address. It's not a big deal." It was a very big deal. I knew enough about finance to understand the danger: credit fraud, legal entanglements, liabilities I hadn't signed up for. My name and her recklessness were now tangled together like exposed wires. When I pressed, Lena grew defiant. "You've always had more than me. Why does it kill you to share?" I wanted to scream. Share? I had spent my entire life sharing chores, responsibilities, even my dignity. What I had built now wasn't excess, it was survival. The final confirmation of their scheme came from an unlikely source. A colleague pulled me aside at work one afternoon. "Hey, I overheard something you might want to know. My husband works at a family law firm. Your dad came in asking about guardianship of an adult child's assets." The words hit me like a blow. Guardianship. They were preparing to argue I couldn't handle my own property. They were going to use the same system Dad knew so well to undermine the independence I had bled for. That night, I lay awake, listening to the faint hum of the new security system. I realized the locks weren't enough. The cameras weren't enough. Because the real invasion wasn't through doors or windows, it was through the people who believed they had the right to claim my life as theirs. I could no longer pretend this was about misunderstandings or family squabbles. It was a deliberate plan. And if I didn't act, I would lose not only my house but the very proof that I had carved a place for myself in the world. Behind closed doors, they were plotting to strip me of everything. And behind my own closed door, I began plotting how to stop them. The next blow arrived in the mail, wrapped in beige paper and formal language that made the stomach drop the way a judge's gavel might. A letter from a lender thanking me for co-signing a car loan for Lena. My name, my email, my address lined up in print as if I had sat across a desk and signed my consent with a smile. I read it twice, then 3 times, fingers trembling. I stared at the signature block and felt the world tilt. I had not co-signed anything. My first reaction was disbelief. Maybe it was a clerical error. Maybe Lena had filled in the wrong name. But the details were too precise. I called the lender, and the representative asked a series of verification questions I could answer, which made the lie more obscene. Someone had used my information. Someone close enough to know what information to use. I went ballistic in the safest way I know how, methodical and cold. I pulled credit reports, checked accounts, read the fine print. There it was, an open auto loan with my name as a cosigner and scheduled payments that I had no memory of authorizing. My heart pounded, not from panic, but from a fierce, focused clarity. This wasn't a family mistake. This was an escalation into theft. When I confronted Lena, I tried for a calm I didn't feel. "Why would you put my name as a cosigner?" I asked, sliding the loan paperwork across the kitchen table. She looked at the paper, then at me, and something like a child's defiance flared. "I needed her to approve the loan," she said, voice flat. "My credit is a mess. You always say you saved and planned. Borrow some of that common sense for once." "You committed fraud," I said, the words tasting metallic. "You used my information without permission. That's illegal." She blinked, and her eyes filled, but not with remorse, more like panic switching to performance. "You're threatening to have me arrested over a misunderstanding?" she pleaded. I was desperate. "You know how hard it's been." Her plea landed like limestone. I thought of all the times I had covered for her, lent her money she never paid back, bailed her out of late fees. But this was different. This wasn't borrowing or enabling, it was identity violation, a boundary crossed into criminal territory. I called the lender back and arranged to visit in person. At the office, a woman in a crisp suit explained how my sister had listed my address and used copies of my documents. There were signatures that could be forged and phone calls that could be spoofed. She recommended I file a police report and place a credit freeze. She spoke in procedural tones that made the betrayal feel bureaucratic and deeply personal at once. Filing the report was worse than I'd imagined. The officer took notes with the mechanical patience of someone who'd seen this too many times, then looked up with a softness that made me ache. "We'll investigate," he said. "It can be complicated when family is involved." The emphasis on the last word felt like a warning. When I told Mom, her reaction was immediate and raw shock 1 minute, then defensiveness. "She didn't mean to hurt you," she kept saying, eyes frantic. "You must have misunderstood." Dad's voice came through like a hammer. "You're overreacting. Family solves these things without police." It was the same script of minimization. Protect the family's image, avoid scandal, keep the peace. But this was no longer about image. My financial security was at stake. My credit score, my ability to take out a mortgage, my credibility at work, everything could be affected by a reckless decision made by someone who had been coddled for years. I spent days untangling the mess calls to creditors, fraud alerts, emails, and notarized denials. Each step felt like picking at scabs, exposing more vulnerability. Friends sent messages of support. A colleague quietly offered to connect me with someone who worked in consumer protections. My life, which I had built with such care, suddenly felt porous. When I finally confronted Lena in front of Mom and Dad, she broke down in a way that demanded sympathy, not accountability. Mom reached for her hand, and Dad looked away. "It was temporary," Lena sobbed. "I was desperate. I didn't think it would become this." Their reflex was to soothe and minimize, to make Lena small and lovable, and me the unreasonable one. That pattern, protect the image, placate the child, was the engine that had powered their choices for years. This time, it could not hold. I sat there and felt the weight of all the small betrayals coalesce into one big, undeniable truth. My family would protect their preferred child, even when she broke the law. I realized then that legal remedies were not just options but necessities. Protecting myself would mean taking actions that might fracture whatever remained of this family. I tightened my hands into fists, feeling not just anger but a clarity that steadied me. This was where I drew a line. Not just for the house, but for my life. When the text came from Mom asking me to stop by for Sunday dinner, I felt the old pull of obligation that had kept me in line for years. I went anyway, because avoidance would not solve what was coming. The house smelled like rosemary and lemon polish. The dining room table was set with the good china. This was not a casual meal, it was a stage. I was not the only audience. Aunt Marisol and Uncle Peter were there, still in their church clothes. My cousin Tasha arrived with a casserole and her tiny gold cross, the one she only wore for serious occasions. Even our longtime family friend, Deacon Ellis, sat near the head of the table with his hands folded as if we were about to pray. I took the seat, at the far end. Lena sat next to Mom, her mascara perfect, her eyes already glassy. Dad stood and cleared his throat. His voice carried the weight of verdicts. We have been talking, and we have a solution that benefits everyone. He looked at me like a judge looks at a defendant. We propose that Lena be added to the deed of your home, joint ownership. Stability and fairness. He nodded once, as if fairness could be pronounced into being. The room tilted, not from surprise, but from the audacity of saying it out loud. I set my napkin down and kept my voice steady. No. The house is mine. I paid for it. I maintain it. I am not adding anyone to the deed. Lena leaned forward, tears ready. I would help with bills. I will not be a burden. I just need a fresh start. Her voice trembled in a way I recognized from childhood performances. Aunt Marisol reached for her hand. Mom's eyes pleaded at me across the table. Dad kept going. Family takes care of family. You have more than enough space. You are alone most nights. He spoke like my solitude was an inventory problem. Then he added the part meant to scare me. If you refuse to be reasonable, we can explore other options. There are legal ways to ensure family property is managed properly. Uncle Peter shifted in his chair. Legal ways. His tone made clear he understood the threat. I breathed in and set down what I had brought. Printed emails, credit reports, the letter from the lender, and a list of dates pulled from my security system logs. I did not raise my voice. I let paper speak. Lena used my address without permission, I said. She used my information to secure a loan. That is fraud. I have filed reports and placed a credit freeze. I looked at Deacon Ellis, then at Aunt Marisol and Uncle Peter. If I add her to my deed, I would be attaching my home to a pattern of reckless behavior. No one at this table would advise a client to do that. I faced Dad. Not even you. The room went quiet. Aunt Marisol pulled on her reading glasses and skimmed the loan letter. She looked up first. Stephanie, is this true? Lena's eyes filled, then slid toward Mom. I was desperate. I did not think it would go this far. I will fix it. Mom reached for her with a soft hush, as if comfort could erase the printed interest rate. Deacon Ellis spoke carefully. Theft is not a misunderstanding. A boundary is not cruelty. His gaze moved to Dad. And threats are not leadership. Uncle Peter nodded, his jaw tight. You cannot demand trust with one hand and break it with the other. Dad straightened. The documents do not change the fact that a family member needs shelter. We do not turn our backs on each other. Tasha lifted her head. We do not take each other's signatures either. She looked at me, then at Lena. You cannot ask for the roof and ignore the rules that keep it standing. I could feel the balance in the room shift. The story that had always positioned me as the difficult one did not hold when laid out in daylight. I spoke to all of them. I am willing to help in ways that do not destroy my life. 2 weeks in the guest room, I said, measured and clear. After that, a written plan for Lena to get her own place. No keys without my permission. No use of my address for anything. No access to my home when I am not present. Violations end any agreement. I paused. And I will not add anyone to my deed. That is final. Dad's face hardened. You are being heedless. You leave me no choice. He was about to outline the guardianship idea. I met his stare. I have counsel. Any attempt to force control of my assets will be contested and made public. I glanced at the deacon and at our relatives. We are already in public. For the first time I saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. Mom's shoulders sagged. Lena looked between faces and realized that the room was no longer tilting in her favor. The tribunal they had convened had become a witness stand, and the testimony was not mine alone. I stood. My voice did not shake. I love this family, but I will not be managed. I will not be intimidated. I protect what I build. I protect my name. I protect my home. I protect my life. I picked up my folder and my keys. The table remained still. The china did not rattle. The verdict was mine to render. The morning after the tribunal, I woke before sunrise, the kind of wakefulness that arrives when your body refuses to be caught unprepared again. I brewed coffee I could barely taste, and lined up the documents on my table as if they were soldiers. I needed facts and a plan, not another round of speeches about family. I opened my laptop and searched for a real estate and protections attorney with no connection to my parents. By noon, I sat in a quiet office above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon, waiting for someone who would not talk to me like a child. Her name was Asha Patel. She listened without interrupting, a pen resting in her hand that she barely used. When I finished, she asked a few clean questions. Was the deed in my name alone? Had any family member contributed to my down payment or mortgage? Did anyone have a written agreement for shared ownership? No, no, and no. She nodded once, then spoke with the calm of someone who handles storms for a living. Legally, you are on firm ground. That does not always stop people from creating noise. Her eyes held mine. Your father understands the system. He can file petitions that waste time and money even if they have no merit. The point would be pressure. I felt a tightening in my chest and steadied it with the rim of the paper cup. What are my options? She laid them out with the same clean strokes she used for her questions. Strengthen your protections. Limit contact. Document everything. If the pressure escalates, seek a protective order. She paused, choosing the next words with care. There is also the cleanest option. Remove the object of the fight. If you do not own the house, there is nothing for them to claim or control. The words landed, like a stone in a lake. Selling the house felt like surrender, yet the ripples carried something that looked like freedom. I did not answer right away. Asha let the silence do its work. She slid a card across the table. If you decide to move quickly, use a realtor who specializes in quiet sales. No signs, no listing blasts. Only vetted buyers and short timelines. Back at the office, my phone buzzed with a message from my coworker Amanda. You have a minute. I met her in the break room. She closed the door and lowered her voice. My husband hears things at work. Your dad met with a family law team about adult guardianship instruments. It might not be about you, but with everything you told me, I thought you should know. The room seemed to tilt and then right itself. Thank you, I said, and I meant it in the deepest way. She squeezed my shoulder, then changed the subject like a pro, talking about a client file in case anyone walked in. That night I walked through my house with a legal pad and a penlight, opening drawers and marking what would go to storage and what would fit in a smaller space. The floorboard by the stairs squeaked its familiar note. The herb garden glowed silver in the moonlight. I pressed my palm to the wall in the reading nook and felt the roughness under the paint. I let myself grieve for a minute, then made a list. The next morning I called a realtor Asha had recommended. Her name was Lena, and she did not waste time. If you want speed, we focus on buyers who can close in cash or who have financing already cleared. We show by appointment only. We never leave a paper trail in your neighborhood. You will accept a little less for certainty. I told her certainty was worth more to me than pride. By day 3, Lena had 3 buyers lined up. I left the house early, returned just after each showing, and packed a few boxes every night. I booked a small storage unit across town and moved with the efficiency of someone on a countdown. I changed my mailing address and set up electronic statements for everything I could. The house began to look a little less like a life and a little more like a memory. During this sprint, my parents kept trying to pull me back to the old script. My mother left a message about a family barbecue this weekend. My father sent a text that read, "We need to revisit Sunday and agree on a plan." I did not respond. There are times when silence is not avoidance but strategy. I saved every message in a folder labeled for counsel. On the 6th day, Lena called with a tone that told me the race was in sight. We have a cash offer near asking, and a 20-day close. They love the garden and do not need inspections to be extensive. I exhaled and felt my shoulders drop for the first time in months. Send the paperwork, I said. She did, and I signed with a hand that did not shake. The decision felt both brutal and clarifying. I was not abandoning a dream. I was outmaneuvering a system that had learned to use my love against me. Removing the prize from the table meant the game could end. It also meant my freedom would not depend on anyone else learning better manners. After I wired the last signatures, I walked to the backyard and stood by the raised bed where basil and rosemary mingled. I clipped a small bundle, wrapped it in twine, and placed it in a box labeled kitchen. I would take the scent with me. The rest could stay. By the time the sun set, I had a lease application ready for an apartment with a doorman and key cards and a view of the river that looked like possibility. I fell asleep on the couch with the lights on and woke to a quiet I had not felt in years. Not the silence of walking on eggshells. The silence of a decision that holds. The closing date landed on a Thursday afternoon, ordinary on the calendar and life-altering in my bones. In the days leading up to it, the house shifted from home to transit station. Boxes stacked by the door like sentries, shelves that had once felt crowded, now showed small, pale rectangles where picture frames had shielded paint from the Sunday. The living room echoed when I spoke. The air smelled faintly of cardboard and rosemary from the bundle I had clipped, now drying near the kitchen window. I moved room by room like a curator in a museum that was about to close. The bedroom held the sound of quiet mornings, when I believed the worst was behind me. I folded the quilt my grandmother sewed and placed it in a plastic bin with a note to myself that read, "Keep close." I opened the closet and touched the wooden hangers as if they could remember the weight of every choice I had made while living here. In the bathroom, I found a small chip in the porcelain sink that I had learned to love. It reminded me that beauty could hold a flaw and still feel whole. I took a cloth and wiped the mirror, then looked at the woman inside it. She looked steady in a way that had nothing to do with walls and floors. She looked like someone who had finally chosen herself. The kitchen was the hardest. This was where friends had gathered and where the habit of laughter had returned to me after years of holding my breath. I wrapped my favorite mug in paper and set it beside the stack of plates that had started the first night in the new apartment. I ran a finger along the window frame where herbs had caught the morning light, then opened the back door for one last walk into the yard. The garden had never been impressive by magazine standards. It had been stubborn and honest. Tomatoes that split in the heat, basil that bolted if I ignored it, mint that tried to take over and had to be cut back again and again. It taught me patience and attention. It taught me that tending something can bring peace without anyone else witnessing it. I crouched and pressed my palms into the soil, then brushed them on my jeans and stood up. I told the yard thank you. No one heard me answer, which felt exactly right. On closing day, Lena met me at the title office, with a folder that looked thin for what it carried. The buyers arrived with open faces and quick smiles. A young doctor and her partner who loved the idea of book club nights and home-cooked meals. We signed, page after page, initials and dates, and neat signatures. When the last document slid across to me, my pen hovered for a breath. I thought of the first night I had eaten pizza on the floor. I thought of the many Sundays when I had read for hours in the window light. I thought of the day the locks changed and my hands shook until the new keys were cool against my skin. I signed, and the pen did not tremble. The doctor's partner squeezed my hand and said they would take good care of the place. I believed them. We exchanged a few practical notes about the squeaky stair and the temperamental porch light. I handed over the keys and felt a loosening in my chest. It was grief on one side and relief on the other, bound together like a double thread. I walked to my car and did not look back until I had closed the door. When I did, the house looked smaller, like an object that had been held too close and now settled into its proper size. The movers came the next morning. They carried out the last boxes and a chair that had never fit quite right but had become a friend anyway. I followed them to the new building where the doorman learned my name. The elevator doors closed and framed my reflection. There I was again, steady and quiet, holding a future no one else had the power to sign away. That night I ordered takeout and ate on my new couch while the river outside turned from silver to black. The apartment hummed with a low, reassuring energy. I slept through until morning without waking to imagine footsteps that were not mine. When I opened my eyes, the first thought that arrived was simple: there would be no secret keys in drawers here. No unannounced inspections, no plan made behind a closed study door. 2 weeks later, my phone rang, and Lena's name appeared. Her voice shook with excitement. She said she was standing on my porch and that Mom and Dad had everything handled. She said she had keys. I walked to the window and looked at the river and the morning light on the water. I told her the truth in a calm voice that felt like standing on solid ground. The house was not mine anymore. It had not been mine for 14 days. If she rang the doorbell, a kind couple would answer. The future moved into position, quiet and certain, as if it had been waiting for me to choose it. Lena's voice came back in quick bursts, like she had started to run. She said the locks felt wrong. She said the living room looked different. She tried one key and then another while a dog barked somewhere down the street. I told her to ring the doorbell. I leaned my shoulder against my kitchen wall and waited. I could hear her breathing. Then there was the faint chime of a bell, and a woman's voice that I recognized as kind even through the phone. "Hello." Lena went quiet, then said my name as if I could make time reverse. The woman spoke again and asked if she could help. Lena stammered and pulled the phone away. I heard a muffled apology, a confused thank you, and the door shut. When she returned to the line, she sounded smaller. "You sold it," I said I did. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up with my parents' number. I answered and braced for the storm. Dad arrived first, his words clipped. "Tell me that you did not do this." I told him it was done. The papers were signed, the buyers had moved in, money was in an account he did not know about. He wanted to know why I would do something so reckless. I told him it was not reckless, it was a boundary he could not pick apart with procedure. Mom took the phone and asked where I was. She said we needed to talk face to face. I told her I would text the address. I added that the front desk would call me before anyone came up. They arrived like a weather system. In the lobby, glass caught their reflections and pushed them back at themselves. The doorman called, and only when I said yes did the elevator open. In the hall, Mom's eyes moved over the framed prints, taking inventory of a life that had not been curated by her. Dad's mouth was a hard line. Lena kept her gaze on the floor and held a key that had become a souvenir of a plan that failed. Inside, the apartment felt bright and unapologetic. Dad started without hello. "You made a life-changing decision without consulting your family. You did it to spite your sister." I poured water into 3 glasses and placed them on the counter, without offering one to him. I told him I did it to protect myself. I told him I knew he had consulted a family law team about instruments that could take control of an adult child's assets. For a second his expression flickered. He recovered and called my information incomplete. I said it was complete enough. Silence stretched in the room, the kind that requires someone to surrender ground. This time I did not move. Mom tried to soften the edges. She said he had only been exploring options. She said families do that when someone is in trouble. I asked her if families also lie to locksmiths to claim emergency access to a grown daughter's home. Dad said he did what he had to. I said that made us even, because so did I. Lena finally spoke, her voice thin. "I thought you would understand. I needed a place to land." I looked at her and saw both the child I used to carry and the woman who had listed my address on a loan without asking. I told her I had offered short-term help and she had refused. I told her that what she wanted was not a landing, it was a takeover. She began to cry. Mom reached for her. Dad stared at the river. The chords of this scene were familiar, but the melody had changed. No one could demand a house that no longer belonged to me. There was a knock at the door. the doorman stood with a package addressed to me with the new apartment number. The timing felt like a small miracle. I signed for it, thanked him, and set the box on the counter. Dad watched the exchange, trying to decide whether to call it theater or evidence. I let him sit with the fact that I now lived in a place where access depended on my consent. When the first wave of fury passed, I told them the next part with care. I had placed fraud alerts on my credit. I had filed reports. Any future attempt to use my name or address would be met with the same response. There would be no second chance to call a crime a misunderstanding. Dad called it dramatic. Mom called it unnecessary. I called it responsible. Lena whispered that I was cruel. I said I was done being a door. They left with less noise than they had brought. In the lobby, the doorman nodded to me in a way that said he had seen many versions of this moment and still believed in better endings. I returned upstairs and stood in the quiet. The city moved beyond the windows. I felt the shape of the plan lock into place. By removing the house from the board, I had taken away the lever they had always used. The old game required a prize. Without it, the only thing left to fight over was my attention, and I had just learned how to guard that too. The phone buzzed once more that night. A text from Aunt Marisol asked if I was safe and if I needed anything. I answered that I was safe and that I had what I needed. I put my phone face down and made tea. The water boiled, the kettle sang, and for the first time in a long time the sound did not have to compete with anyone else's demands. The counter was steady under my hands. The view reached out and did not ask for anything. I slept with the window cracked and dreamed of a door that opened only from my side. The morning after my parents left the apartment, I wrote 3 things on a sticky note and pressed it to my fridge. Protect your name. Protect your time. Protect your peace. It was not poetry. It was a contract. I kept it in my line of sight the way you keep a lighthouse in view when you learn a new coastline. There were practical steps first. I met with Asha again and signed affidavits for the lender. We sent certified letters and kept copies in a file that felt thick enough to stand up on its own. The credit bureaus confirmed the freeze and flagged the unauthorized loan. The lender removed my name and updated the account to reflect the fraud report. My mailbox stopped carrying envelopes with Lena's name and my address. The locks at the old house no longer mattered. The records did. At work, I asked my manager for a few minutes behind a closed door. I explained enough to make sense of my missed calls and my sudden need to keep certain hours. I did not give him the family saga. I brought results instead. He nodded and said my clients had been writing emails with my name in them and the word trust. 2 weeks later, the firm announced that I would lead a new portfolio and mentor junior advisors. The raise felt like a full breath. The title felt like a clean slate. Amanda left a sticky note on my desk that said "proud of you" and tucked a chocolate under it like a blessing. Family moved more slowly. The first ripple came from Aunt Marisol in the form of a text that asked if I would attend a community fundraiser at the church hall. I said yes, and brought a tray of roasted vegetables, because it felt like the kind of dish that travels well. The hall filled with voices and the soft clatter of serving spoons. Deacon Ellis greeted me with a kind smile and asked about the new place. He did not pry. He did something better. He listened when I said I was tired and then told me I looked sturdy. It is a small word and it meant the world. Dad kept his distance. When he finally reached out, he asked to meet at a diner near the courthouse where he spent most of his days. He arrived in a suit that had always meant authority and sat across from me like we were on opposite sides of a table where settlement terms are written. He said he regretted calling the locksmith. He said guardianship had been a bad idea. He never used the word apology, but I recognized the shape of it in his voice. He asked if there could be rules. I took a breath and put my rules on the table. No keys unless I hand them over in person. No visits without an invitation. No discussion of my property or finances with anyone outside the room unless I have asked for that help. He read the list and nodded once. We both signed it and I watched him slide his copy into a folder with the care he gives to contracts that matter. Mom's thaw came in smaller gestures. She asked for the address of my favorite florist and sent a plant that thrives in low light. She started every call with "How are you?" and waited for an answer before giving me news. She asked if she could visit and sent the date she had in mind. When she came, she looked out at the river and said the place felt like air after rain. She did not move a single picture frame. Lena wrote an email that took 3 tries to read without shaking. She said she had started therapy. She said she had a job at a receptionist desk where the phones never stop. She said she would transfer the car to her name alone and sent a copy of the paperwork. She offered a repayment plan for the money I had spent on notarizations and filings. It was not much, but it was a plan. I replied that I accepted it, and that I would not be a reference for any future loans. She wrote back that she understood. Weeks later, she mailed my old spare key to Asha's office with a short note that said, "I am returning what was never mine." The public payoff finished where it began, in a room where family had tried to manage my life. My parents hosted a Sunday potluck and invited the same circle that had watched the tribunal. Before dinner, Dad cleared his throat and said he had overstepped. He said a house belongs to the person who pays for it and that boundaries are not disrespect. He looked at Lena and said she would be building her own home on her own terms. He looked at me and said he would not interfere again. The words did not erase what he had done, but they set a record in front of the people who had once been used to pressure me. That record is now the story people repeat. My apartment grew warm with small rituals. Sunday mornings with coffee and a book. Weeknight walks by the river. Phone calls that ended before the old edge crept in. The sticky note on my fridge wrinkled at the corners and I kept it anyway. I learned to sleep with the window cracked and the city moving like a tide below me. When I woke, the first thought that arrived was simple. I had rewritten a script that had been handed to me in childhood, and I had done it without permission slips. Justice did not look like gloating. It looked like safety. It looked like a contract signed by the person who had once tried to write mine for me. It looked like my sister returning a key and choosing work over shortcuts. It looked like my mother asking before touching the frames on my wall. It looked like a future that belonged to me and would continue to belong to me because I had learned how to guard it. On the first quiet Saturday of spring, I stood on my balcony with a pot of basil and a small pair of pruning shears. I clipped the first leaves and rubbed them between my fingers until the scent filled my hands. The city kept moving. The river kept going. My life held steady. I walked inside and taped a new note below the old one. Protect your joy. Then I made breakfast and fed myself like someone worth the care.